This new series is titled I'll Do It Tomorrow. Do we have anybody in here that will just, if it's up to you, you'll do it tomorrow? Right? Just pretty much all of us, right? Well, in some cases that's not always bad, but in cases of, like, say if your yard needs mowed and you keep putting that off until tomorrow, like somebody in this room, eventually it's going to rain and you're going to be at the point where you're not going to be able to mow the yard, and then eventually the grass is going to get too high, and by the time you can finally get around to mowing it again, it's going to be just way too high and problems are going to happen. And that's what happened to me. You know, I just kept putting it off, and I already had a lawnmower that was on its last leg, so to speak, and Dwayne knows all about it. He's gotten to know my lawnmower real well. He's been under it several times. But the deck was rusting. And really on one side it was pretty much rusted all the way through. It was just kind of barely hanging there. And so I really could only use it if you know, the grass was just a little bit high, you know, and I could mow it down, didn't have any problems. Well, finally the deck got to where it was kind of leaning. And as I was mowing the grass, you could see these uneven rows up and down the yard, and it just looked really, really bad. Well, so, but I was really hoping that I could make it through this season. You know, this one last season, just get me through. You know, just got to mow it a few more times, and so there was my dilemma. I was holding it off. I'll do it later. I'll get to it later, so I wouldn't have to mow it so many times. You know, and so I let it slide, and then it rained, and I couldn't mow it, and then it got real tall and real thick, but I tried anyway. And so I went out there in the backyard, I got on my mower, I'm going up and down, and pretty soon the thing just, one side of the deck is just on the ground, and I can't go anywhere. So I can't mow my yard. I got a deck that doesn't work, so thankfully Dwayne comes and he brings his, and I'm able to mow it. But there's some consequences, right, to doing things tomorrow, right? A lot of times tomorrow never comes, right? Like, I'll go to the gym tomorrow, right? Tomorrow will come, I'll go to the gym tomorrow, right? I'll start that diet tomorrow, right? Whatever, sure. We all say that, right? I'll start it tomorrow. Hey, this was bad for me. I'll study for that test tomorrow. Nah, I won't. I'll read that book tomorrow, right? Put it off to tomorrow, we'll read that book. Let's get a little more personal here. Let's get a little bit closer to where we want to be tonight. How about this? I'll make that call tomorrow. I'll make that call tomorrow. That important call that I need to make, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll chase my dream tomorrow. I'll wait till tomorrow to chase my dream. Or here's a big one. I'll deal with my emotions tomorrow. I'll have time for it today. I'll deal with my emotions tomorrow. So there's all kinds of things that happen in our life, seasons of life that we go through, that we try to hold on to what we think is normal. Hold on to how things are today, because they're not so bad. Things are pretty good right now. If I were to make that call today, who knows what'll happen? If I were to deal with my emotions today, who knows where that'll lead to? I'm just going to shove it off until tomorrow and deal with it tomorrow. And then again, tomorrow never comes, and here I am a month or 5 months or a year or 5 years or 20 years down the road, and I've never dealt with my emotions. And all of a sudden it starts coming back, and I'm starting to feel these emotions again. And because I didn't deal with them years ago, now I've got to relive it and try to deal with it again. And so this series is going to help us hopefully find the power to be able to change all of that, to where we're no longer saying, I'll do it tomorrow. I want us to be able to have the power to deal with it today, to deal with those emotions today, to do those difficult things today. But let's face it, change is not easy. Nobody likes to go through change. We don't want to change our home. We don't want to change our job. We don't want to change our family. We don't even want to change our seat. And so we deal with these changes all the time. Changes, in fact, you may not know this, but change is a natural and a normal part of life. In fact, it's been said that the only constant is change. So if we're going to get used to anything in life, let's get used to change. But that's okay. It's normal. It's natural. We have changes in seasons. Well, not down here, but in most parts of the country, we have changes in seasons. Y'all don't know this, but there is a fall. Y'all don't know this, but there's a spring. Okay, there are changes in seasons. Those are natural changes. There's changes in weather. You guys don't know this, but there is something called snow and sleet. But there's changes in weather. There's sunny days and there's cloudy days. There's rainy days. So there's hurricane days, right? National Hurricane Days, right here in Louisiana. But those are changes that are natural and normal. Planting and harvesting, farming, there's changes that are natural and normal in that. There are natural and normal changes to our lives. Think about this. Do you remember when you learned how to walk? Nobody does that, do they? Nobody remembers that day. Or talk. Remember when you learned how to talk? Those are changes that take place. Life is never the same when your baby learns how to walk. Trust me. Things change. You can't sit on the couch anymore. You got to run around the house and chase and keep little Brad from getting into trouble. I don't know why I thought of Brad. I know one Brad in my life. And when they learn to talk, man, life never changes, does it? Because now they've gone from this sweet little baby to this chatty little baby, right? We go from say something, dada, dada, son, stop talking. You know, that's changes. Those are natural and normal changes. What about this? Do you remember the day that you discovered pickles? Listen, you'll never go through a change like when you see your child discover pickles. And my dad kind of takes that honor. He loves being the first one to give, our son or our daughter their first pickle. And the face that they make is priceless. And I could watch it for hours. But here's the deal. They all love pickles. We cannot keep a jar of pickles in the house. They absolutely love pickles. Or discover sugar. Life changes after we discover sugar.
That's for sure.
Life changes after we turn 16. Life changes after we leave the house. Life changes after we get married. Life changes after we begin to have a family. These are all natural and normal changes to life. But here's the deal. It's our response to these changes that are what's important. And that's why I asked the question, how did you deal with the change or the difficult challenge that you experienced? That all of a sudden change in your life, how did you respond to that? Because that's what makes all the difference. And to illustrate this, what would happen if we got the call today to be on the first plane tomorrow to a little town called, Utqiagvik, Alaska. Anybody ever heard of that? Could you imagine a man or a woman from Sulphur, Louisiana going up to the northernmost town in the United States right now? You would do that? You would love it, wouldn't you? You know what's crazy about this? So Saturday, this next Saturday, something pretty amazing is about to happen. in this town, I won't name it again, but they're gonna see the sun for the first time since November.
Wow.
Right? Can you imagine somebody from here going up there to total darkness? How would we handle that change? With a flashlight. See, this man knows how to go through change. He knows how to handle it. You know what that's called? You know what we're going to talk about tonight? That right there is what this message is all about. You have to embrace it. You have to embrace the change that you're going through. Now, I'm not saying you got to like it. And I'm not saying that it's going to be easy if you embrace it. And I'm not saying it's going to be fun. I'm just saying that if you're going to make it through the way that God is intending for you to make it through that change, you have to embrace it. All right? You have to embrace it. And that word embrace, I'm getting a little bit ahead, but I want to tell you what that word means. Embrace means to take or clasp in the arms. To hug. All right, so you guys know what embrace means. You come in here and you embrace one another. You hug one another. Well, that's what you have to do with your difficult situation. All right, you got to hug it. You got to clasp it. You got to embrace it. Otherwise, you're going to be doing this. You know, you're going to be, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll deal with it tomorrow. So you're either going to embrace it or you're going to reject it. And it's critical which of those two you do. And I'll go ahead and give you a hint. This is not the right one. All right? But we like to do this one because we don't want to deal with those issues. He's probably the only one in here that would get on that plane tomorrow and go. The rest of us would reject it. I'll just go get another job. You know? So how we deal with it is critical, listen, for our witness. How we deal with these difficult challenges and seasons in our life is critical for our witness. Well, what are we saying about God when we deal with these things in a rejecting way? What are we saying? What are we saying about God when we can embrace it and get the most out of it? But not only does it deal with us in our witness, but it also deals in our health. I mean, when we carry these things for days and months and years, it has a negative effect on us physically and emotionally. And so we have to be able to deal with these things in the right way. And so today I want to, and through this series, I want us to be able to understand and to develop this power that we have to be able to embrace change. And instead of, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll go ahead and jump on that today and deal with that today. So if you have your Bible, turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Y'all know this, y'all read this time and time again, but I want us to read it today from this idea of change. Because everything I'm going to talk about right now deals with change. All right, these are opposites. And when these things happen in our life, change takes place. And so you can try to be as personal as you possibly can as we're going through these verses, 1 through 8, and let's see what it looks like as far as how change goes. And so verse 1 says, there is an occasion for everything. And there's a time for every activity under heaven. All right, so here we go. First, there's a time to give birth, and there's a time to die. There's a time to plant, and there's a time to uproot. There's a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones. Look here, a time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing. A time to search and a time to count as lost. A time to keep and a time to throw away. There is a time, people, to throw away. There is a time to throw away. All right, I just wanted to hang out there for just a second. There is a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate, and a time for war and a time for peace. All right. Change. I'm not going to go through every one of these tonight individually, but just to highlight a couple. A time to give birth. We all know that a big change happens when ladies give birth. All right, when families begin to have children, change takes place. And guess what? And maybe you were one of these families, but not everybody changes well to having that family, to having children come in. There's this thing called postpartum depression, and maybe some of you experienced that, but there's a change that takes place when a birth happens. Life's never the same. After that first one, life is never the same. Another change takes place when you have the second one, but after 2 or 3, change doesn't really take place much. You just throw the next one in. And they just have to figure it out, right? So, but after that first one, that second one, maybe the third one, change is a big deal. Well, and then there's a time to die. And God tells us that there's a time to die. Our days are numbered. All right, and there isn't anything that we can do to add a day or take away a day. God knows when your time is coming. But listen, change happens when somebody passes away. All right, if you've lost a loved one, if you've lost a family member, you understand that change happens when somebody dies. And so we have to be able to, and a lot of times when somebody dies, we find ourselves falling into a rut and finding into a depression. And really that's when we say, I'll deal with this tomorrow. I'll deal with this tomorrow. I don't want to deal with it today. I want to put it off until tomorrow. And that's when the years come into play that we haven't dealt with things like that. And maybe that's you in this room tonight. There's some things in your life that have created a change that you just are not ready and haven't dealt with yet. A time to plant, a time to uproot. There's changes that take place there. A time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing. A time to search and a time to count as lost, and a time to keep and a time to throw away. So change is happening in every one of these. They're opposite of each other. And what it tells us is that change is a part of life. Change is a part of life. It's a part of your life. It's a part of my life. And not only is it a part of life, but it also can be a very difficult part of life, a very unwanted part of life, and maybe even a very unwelcomed part of life. None of us welcome death. None of us want death. None of us want war. None of us welcome war. But in our own life, there are some times that we go through some changes that we don't want, that we don't welcome. And this difficulty or unwelcoming attitude can keep us from embracing the change. So when it's too difficult, we don't want to deal with it. When it's unwanted, we don't want to deal with it. And when it's unwelcome, we don't want to deal with it. I'll do it tomorrow. That's what we say. That's what we think. I'll deal with it tomorrow. I don't want a different house. So therefore, I'm not going to take care of it. Or, I don't want another teacher. Therefore, I'm not going to listen, I'm not going to obey, and I'm not going to respect my teacher. Because that's unwanted, that's unwelcomed, and I don't want to embrace this change. I don't want a new family. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to them. I'm not going to obey them. I'm not going to respect their authority. I didn't want them. I don't want them. They're unwanted. They're unwelcome into my life. I don't want a new boss. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to this one, obey this one, respect this one, because I don't want him. He's unwanted. She's unwelcome. I don't want another president. Therefore, I'm not going to listen to him. I'm not going to obey him. I'm not going to respect him. Why? Because he's unwanted. He's unwelcome. But you see, all of those responses are this. They're the rejecting responses. And they're the wrong responses. Okay? It's not the way that God intended for us to respond to changes. He wants us to hug that new president. I know. Embrace him. Embrace that boss you don't like. Embrace that teacher you don't want. Embrace that new family you didn't ask for. Embrace that new home that you had to move to that you didn't want to. Whatever else. Fill in the blank. But you got to embrace it. You got to embrace it. Change is a part of life. But even believers can get caught up in procrastinating. Shocked, aren't you? I'm not shocked because I are one. I'm a believer that I can procrastinate as much as I can. I don't like that part about me. But that says something about the way I handle change. Procrastination is another one of these rejecting responses. This procrastinating keeps us from embracing the change. If I can put it off as long as I can, if I can study tomorrow, I'll do it. I'm not embracing that. I'm not looking forward to that. If I can put it off until tomorrow, I'm not embracing it, I'm rejecting it. I'm not ready for what this change will bring, so I'll think about it tomorrow. I like the way things are, so I'll deal with that later. I didn't ask for this, and so I'm not going to do anything about it today. And then there's the fear of change, the fear of results, the fear of letting go, and the fear of failure that keeps us from embracing the change. But embracing, hugging it, clasping it, says, I'll jump right on it. It says, I'll jump right in there. Where's my flashlight? I'm going to do this. I'm going. That's what embracing does. Embracing says, I'll receive it. And I'll deal with the consequences that come along with it. And I'll embrace those too. And so we have to get away from rejecting these things that we don't want, that we don't welcome, and the things that we want to put off until tomorrow, and we've got to start dealing with them and hugging them and getting through it. Getting through it. Ms. Nancy, there's counselors out there. There's help out there. There are people out there that want to help you get through these changes in your life. They're available. Pastors, counselors. So here's the deal. Change is a part of life. All right, I think we've nailed that down. And it will either bring us closer to God or take us further away from Him. And Jeff, I'm so glad to hear your testimony, because that change in your life brought you closer to God, brought you to God. Amen. Brought you closer to God, right, Miss Paula? Miss Nancy brought you closer to God. See, change will do that. Change will you'll either get in this posture right here where you start rejecting these changes in your life, therefore ultimately rejecting God, or you'll start embracing these changes in your life, ultimately bringing you closer to God because you recognize and understand that you need God to help you get through it. You need God. And so it would be to our benefit to embrace Him. And that's the key. That's the key to being able to handle change. Embrace it. You have to embrace it. You have to embrace it. Proverbs 16, I think you're going to like this part of the message. I really do. Proverbs 16:9 says this, in his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And so hopefully I can take a little bit of pressure off of us and encourage us. God is the orchestrator of the change. God is the orchestrator of the change. God is the orchestrator of the change. One of the most difficult changes in my life came when my dad went through a divorce. And the same thing that happened to Jeff happened to my dad. And I believe with all of my heart that God orchestrated that change in his life. God is the one that orchestrates the change. I want you to understand that. I want you to grab that and hold on to that. Because you need to know that God is behind it. You need to know that God is in the middle of the change that you're going through because He orchestrated it. He called it. He brought it on. I don't understand it, but God is up to something. God is doing something. It's His plan. He's the one that orchestrated the change. Old Testament scholar J. Stafford Wright says it this way. He says, man is to take his life day by day from the hand of God, realizing that God has fitting time for each thing to be done. In the midst of change, Christians should recognize that each moment is God-given and should be lived in recognition of that fact. It is God-given. The change that you are going through is God-given. And He is right there to help you make that change. You just have to embrace it. You have to embrace the change. Because God wants to bring good out of the situation. He wants to bring good out of the situation. Job, big changes in his life. Big changes in his life. Paul, big changes in his life. Abraham, big changes in his life. The disciples, big changes in their life. But guess what? They all embraced them. And the end of the story turns out pretty good for every one of them. Let me give you another illustration. Jeremiah chapter 25. I'm reading through Jeremiah right now, and this kind of caught my attention. You know, when we talk about Old Testament, and we're trying to kind of give a little bit of a 3-minute testimony on the Old Testament, you know, God raises up the children of God are being enslaved in Egypt. They're crying out to God. God hears their voice. He calls on Moses. Moses tries to reject this change in his life and says, God, I can't do it. I don't know how to speak. I'm not ready. Find somebody else. Well, ultimately, he embraces it. He goes and he brings the children of Israel out of Egypt, brings them into the promised land. And here the story goes from that point on. It's this little routine of they turn away from God. They disobey Him. They turn to idolatry. And then God has to send them into slavery somewhere else, or sends a famine or some kind of something to bring them back to Him. So they repent, they come back, and they get to live back into their promised land again, and there's peace and there's prosperity, disobeying again. And there's this cycle. And that's how we explain it. Well, Jeremiah chapter 25 kind of opened my eyes a little bit to the fact that there was a little bit of time that passed, between when his people began to disobey him, and he did something about it. And so I think we have it up on the screens. If not, I'll have to try to find it real quick. Jeremiah chapter 25. Let me read this to you real quick. All right, here we go. This is the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah. Whoa. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah, which was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. The prophet Jeremiah spoke concerning all the people of Judah and all the residents of Jerusalem as follows. All right. From the 13th year of Josiah, son of Ammon, king of Judah, until this very day, listen, look at this, 23 years. 23 years the word of the Lord has come to me. So Jeremiah, for 23 years, has been telling these people, look, you got to turn back to God. You got to follow him again. You've got to obey him again. And if you'll turn back to him, he will keep you from being, he'll keep the Babylonians from coming and destroying your town, your territory, your country. And I've spoken to you time and time again, but you have not obeyed. And so the Lord sent all his servants, the prophets, to you time and time again. But you have not obeyed or even paid attention. And he announced, turn each of you from your evil way of life and from your evil deeds. Live in the land the Lord gave to you and your ancestors long ago and forever. Do not follow other gods to serve them and to worship them, and do not provoke me to anger by the work of your hands. Then I will do you no harm. But you would not obey me. This is the Lord's declaration. In order that you might provoke me to anger by the work of your hands and bring disaster on yourselves. Therefore, this is what the Lord of hosts says. Because you have not obeyed my words after 23 years, I'm going to send for all the families of the north. This is the Lord's declaration. And send for my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and I will bring them against this land, against its residents, and against all these surrounding nations, and I will completely destroy them and make them a desolation, a derision, and ruins forever. I will eliminate the sound of joy and gladness from them, the voice of the groom and the bride, the sound of the millstones and the light of the lamp. This whole land will become a desolate ruin, and these nations will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. For 70 years. For 70 years they'll be in captivity, because for 23 of them, they didn't listen. They didn't pay attention. They were embracing the wrong thing, and they weren't willing to change. They were rejecting the change that God was trying to bring into their life, to save them, to give them peace and prosperity. And they refused it. So listen to me. Maybe there's somebody in this room, you're embracing the wrong thing. And you need to not embrace it anymore. As it says here in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, it says there is a time to embrace and a time to avoid embracing. Are you embracing the wrong thing? Are you embracing something that you should be rejecting? But be encouraged that it's God who orchestrates the change. God was orchestrating that. He was wanting his people to change. He wanted them to live in a land of prosperity. He did not want to send them into captivity. So when you embrace change, when you embrace the change, when you hug it, when you clasp it with everything you've got, listen, tragedy can turn into an opportunity. When you embrace the change, what you thought was failure can turn into the greatest blessing and victory in your life. When you embrace the change, listen, rock bottom can turn into a firm foundation for rebuilding. And when you embrace change, listen to me, even death can turn into life. Can't tell you how many times somebody's sudden death has brought life to somebody else. Right there at the funeral, they've given their life to Jesus Christ. Even in death can bring life. When you embrace change, the new coach, the new teacher, that new boss, that new family, that new house, that new job, listen, that new diet, that new book, that new dream can launch you into your destiny. If instead of I'll do it tomorrow, I'll embrace it today. What you feel like is something that'll pull you into a deep depression will be the very thing that God will use to exalt your life, to lift you up out of that pit that you're in, put you on a new, firm foundation, and set you on the rest of your life, launching you to your destiny. Think about Joseph for just a second. We're familiar with the story with Joseph, right? He was rejected from his families, thrown into a well, sold into slavery, taken to a foreign land, falsely accused of rape, thrown in prison, forgotten about for a couple of years, and then launched into the second most powerful man in Egypt. All because in every one of those instances, he embraced it. He said, what man means for evil, God meant for good. And he was willing to embrace those changes in his life, and God continued, ultimately launching him up to the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. And he wasn't even an Egyptian. He was a foreigner, unheard of. We have a great example of someone embracing change. You may not know this, but his name is Jesus. You're like, Pastor, what do you mean? What changed in his life? Well, he had to go from creator to redeemer. He had to go from receiving the sacrifices to becoming the sacrifice. He had to come from being God to becoming a man. He had to go from judging to the one being judged. He had to go from the one being sinless to bearing the sins of all humanity. I would say those were some pretty drastic changes. But all so that he could ultimately embrace you. Hug you, put his arms around you. In fact, I left off one of the definitions for embrace, and it's this: to take or receive gladly or eagerly, to accept willingly. And that's what Jesus did for you. He willingly accepted you. He embraced you and your life. He gladly became a man. He gladly took on the judgment of the people. He gladly stepped out of heaven to become the Redeemer. He gladly stepped out of heaven to become the sacrifice so that he could embrace us. And he did it all so that we could experience and embrace the most wonderful change of all. Y'all ready for this? The most wonderful change of all. The change from eternal death to eternal life. The change from being a sinner to a saint. The change from living by the flesh to living by the Spirit. That's what it gives us a chance to do. To experience the most powerful, important, wonderful, breathtaking change of all. To become his child. To embrace him whenever we want. And to be embraced by him 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. He never takes his arms off of us. He never stops embracing us. On your worst day, he embraces you. When nobody else will put their arms around you. When everybody else is doing this, he's doing this. Because that's who he is. So will you take the responsibility to follow God in every season of life? Every change that you experience in your life, will you take a lesson from these characters and Jesus himself to embrace those changes? Recognizing and understanding that it is God who is orchestrating those changes. It's for your good. God's trying to tell you something. God's trying to do something in your life. If he wants you to go to the northernmost part of Alaska, by golly, go. If he's the one telling you to go, embrace it. Because there's something in store for you up there. There's something in store for you going through that change. Don't say, I'll do it tomorrow. Get on it right now. Embrace it right now. In fact, that's the question. Will you embrace the change? See, God never wants to leave you where you're at. He's always wanted to take you somewhere. And if you're being disobedient, he'll bring some kind of change into your life to get you to be obedient again. If you're falling short of your potential, God's going to bring some kind of a change into your life to try to get you to move into your potential. God is orchestrating the change. Amen. Let's embrace it. And that's where the power comes from. That's where the power comes from. For us to be able to change it all, we've got to embrace the change.